very much, Chief LaValle. As Chief LaValle pointed out, the intent today is to engage everyone in the room in thoughtful and creative discussions. The speakers have been specifically selected and invited to provide a very broad perspective of these issues, and what they've also been asked to do is to stimulate discussion. We will have our panel speak first, and we would ask that you hold your questions, but what we have is two mics. We have mic number 1 at the front and 2 at the back, and after they have finished, we will leave adequate time for a Q&A discussion. It is my great honor to introduce you to our first panel. Hope DeVoe Henderson is the President and CEO of the RCMP Foundation. Ms. Henderson is a Métis of Cree descent, her ancestors being one of the original settling families of the Red River settlements in Manitoba, proudly referred to as the Métis homeland. Hope is a very active member in the Aboriginal community, and I know many people in this room know her because she has worked nationally on Indigenous issues and corporate engagement in Indigenous issues. Until very recently, Ms. Henderson spent almost her entire career in the energy sector in senior roles fostering successful relationships between communities and organizations and industry. And she has worked on some of Canada's most controversial energy projects. Ms. Henderson has 23 years of experience in the energy sector, leading stakeholder engagements on projects that include the Alaska and Mackenzie pipeline projects in Canada's north, Alberta's oil sands and offshore projects in Newfoundland, and to power companies in Quebec. She was recently appointed in 2014 as CEO of the RCMP Foundation. Ms. Hope DeVoe Henderson.
Thanks, Marie. Good morning, everyone. Chief LaValle, thank you for inviting me to speak here today and to join minds in, on Star Trek we had a Vulcan meld mine. Well, today we're going to have an Aboriginal mine meld. So, Elder Williams, thank you for opening prayer. Other chiefs and elders here today, I really look forward to sharing thoughts and ideas with you here today. So Marie mentioned that I'm Métis, and it's become apparent to me that I actually need to say that all the time, because obviously it's not apparent. I took my RCMP dog to the vet last weekend, and I was trying to squeeze a bunch of things in that day, so I went to the vets before I went to speak at the Métis Nation of Alberta's annual General Assembly. And he was taking his sweet time, so I said, can you speed it up a little bit? I've got to go speak at an assembly. And he said, okay, what kind of assembly? And I said, well, it's the Métis Nation. He said, oh, I'm from Winnipeg. He said, I'm fairly familiar with the Métis. And he said, why would you be speaking at that? And I said, I'm Métis. And he goes, really? You don't look it? And I went, what does a Métis look like? And it was kind of obvious to me. Well, I thought based on his name tag. I said, might you be Jewish? And he said, yes. And he goes, how Métis are you? And I went, how Jewish are you? So he kind of went, good point. So I guess I have to introduce myself as Métis because I don't know what a Métis looks like anymore, so I have to identify myself as such. And I'd like to wish welcome and a great thanks to Aditya, who's going to co-panel with me on this. And this morning he asked me, he said, are you an RCMP officer? And I said, no, the closest I ever came to police was when they showed up on our doorstep to bring my brother home. until recently when I started with the RCMP Foundation. So we're here to discuss entrepreneurship and employment solutions and all the other afflictions that go with that affect our peoples. So I have put together a little slide deck, and I'm the most technically challenged person, so I'm going to try and use this fancy little contraption here. So 20 years on, maybe even 30 or 40, the stats in Canada haven't changed. So a little bit of an echo in the room here. I'm going to echo some of Chief LaValle's comments. But I want to build a context before I get into what we're trying to achieve and how we're trying to achieve it through the RCMP Foundation to the solutions to the context. So there'll be some repetition here in the statistics that Chief LaValle used, but I think the important thing is that we're recognizing the statistics need to change. So many of you will know this, so I'll go through this part quickly. 42% of the working age population in Canada is between the ages of 49 to 64, present company included, I would guess. Most rapidly growing age group actually in Canada is the 60 to 64 group, and this group is actually the fastest growing because the statistics show it's at 29%, and the anticipation is that this group will accelerate in the coming years. And the unfortunate part about all of this is that some of these stats are from the 2006 census. We don't have a long-form census anymore, so it's going to be harder to track these numbers going forward. There are more people aged 55 to 64 in Canada than there are people aged 15 to 24. So 55 to 64 is the retirement range on average. So StatsCan does warn that we will have a wash of substantial amount of talent and experience going out of the workforce, and that's already started. It started several years ago. And as I said, many of you know this because you work with these statistics every day. StatsCan also says that in order to close this gap of people retiring in Canada, that by 2016, now these are from the 2006 census, by 2016, 200,000 jobs will be needed to close that gap. That's next year. The Aboriginal population is the fastest growing segment, as Chief LaValle said, of Canadian society, and it has been for quite some time now. Now, I generally will give this presentation in Alberta, so I have some Alberta-related statistics in there, but 50% of Aboriginal people in Alberta are under the age of 24, and I don't think that changes much across the country. It might go actually even higher in places like Saskatchewan. Kelly would know better. So StatsCan, in its wisdom, has interpreted these statistics to say that the Aboriginal population is increasing importance to the economy and is one of the populations with a great potential to expand the workforce and to take those 200,000 jobs. Well, as Chief LaValle also pointed out, that I'll get into a little bit more detail, our unemployment rate is 19% versus 7-ish lately for the rest of non-Aboriginal Canada. Incarceration is 11.5 times more for Aboriginal people than non-Aboriginal people. 68% of children in care in Canada are Aboriginal. A lot of people don't realize that that's higher than when the residential schools were in full effect in this country. 26% of the admissions to the corrections system were Aboriginal compared to 6% of the non-Aboriginal population. 24% of Aboriginal youth in the correctional system are male, and this number was one that surprised me. 34% are female. And I'll talk a little bit more about what the RCMP Foundation is doing about that statistic, the female statistic. Aboriginal youth, so I've seen some recent studies where they're studying the data in 8 jurisdictions in Canada, where Aboriginal youth make up 6% of the population in those jurisdictions, which it's a little bit higher than the national average, but represent 26% of the corrections admissions. 20 to 25% of non-Aboriginal women in this country will have been sexually abused as children, but up to half of Aboriginal women were sexually abused as children. Aboriginal youth offenders are accused of homicide, 11 times more than youth elsewhere in Canada. Aboriginal people represent less than 3% of the Canadian population, but make up 17% of the prison population. And as many of us know, suicide is 5 to 6 times more common in Aboriginal youth than non-Aboriginal youth. So how do we address this? We've got the need to invest in employment creation in the country, and that the federal government has looked at through temporary foreign workers, immigration policy. So we're investing, according to these statistics, dollars in corrections, children in care, welfare, shelters, treatment programs. Should we not shift that money to education so that those 200,000 jobs can be filled by domestic Aboriginal people rather than foreign temporary workers and immigration. That's a political discussion, but I think we have talent here in Canada that we can invest in and develop, that we must invest in and develop. So at the RCMP Foundation, our solutions are to change the context for Aboriginal youth. We serve youth at risk across the country, but we do have a high focus on Aboriginal youth because of the statistics that we just saw. So we've just started our third decade at the RCMP Foundation. We are a separate legal entity with an independent board. We were started by the RCMP to address some of the things that the RCMP 21 years ago saw as a need in the community, which was their police officers were spending thousands and thousands and thousands of hours volunteering in their communities without a means by which to support those Mounties in the work that they did from a financial perspective. So we were started to raise money to help the Mounties in their volunteer work in the communities. And since I started with the foundation a few months ago, I don't think I've cried so much in my career, tears of joy, when I see the work that our Mounties are doing in the communities and how they're connecting with the youth. It's quite heartwarming. So what's the solution? I think that's why we're all here today, is to put our minds together to figure those out. So it starts with getting healthy, staying healthy, getting motivated, getting involved, and getting educated. So get ready, Canada. The stats are about to change. So our model at the RCMP Foundation is one we call the Partnerships for Community. It's an integrated program delivery model. We have supported Mountie volunteer efforts with about $9 million invested in youth across the country over the last 20 years. Our integrated program approach addresses problems that youth are faced with today. And what's interesting is that the programs, we're a dichotomous organization in that we are a fundraising body, but we give it all away. We reinvest that into community organizations across the country where our Mounties are volunteering. And that's our only really strict criteria, is that we invest in the volunteer work of our Mounties. We only work in multi-party partnerships. I have 3 staff, so we can't do this alone. The Mounties are the boots and spurs on the ground, and we support them in their initiatives with the other organizations, so we work in partnership. Our partnership model is really a needs-based packaging, is the way I've sort of evaluated it since I've been there. We've got probably dozens and dozens of initiatives that we have developed or funded over the years. And I kind of look at it about, like we've done community cadet corps, which is actually a very strong component of the work that we do, both with Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal youth. We have programs where we try to invest in strengthening the remote communities by the use of technology. We have our breakfast clubs. We have put thousands and thousands of breakfasts in kids' mouths across this country over the last 21 years. We have a new initiative with astronomer Rob Cardinal that we are investing in him and getting him and his telescopes into Aboriginal schools, so he can teach teachers how to use astronomy in the classroom, both for science, math, and using Aboriginal culture, traditional culture. We have anti-bullying and cyber safety initiatives. We have young youth academies that are almost like a mini depot. I don't know how many of you are familiar with Mounties have to go to depot before they become a Mountie. And so we run junior youth academies, a lot of them in the north actually, looking at partnering with Arctic College soon on the rollout of those. We have issued millions of child ID kits, and they're just a little envelope we give to schools across the country. They can give it to the kids and they go home with it, and it's a little ID kit where they take their eye color, their hair color, they take a sample of their hair, they put it in a little baggie that goes into the kit. It's a little fingerprint strip, they take their fingerprints. So in the event that a child goes missing, and that's a whole nother situation we're dealing with in this country on murdered and missing, but they at least have this data, and this is kept by the parents. So we've issued millions of those, and I still have 80,000 of them in stock. So if anybody wants child ID kits, see me afterwards. And we have programs that address family violence. We have leadership and mentoring, motivational speaker series. We're partnering actually to bring motivational speakers to Aboriginal communities in the north. Reading and literacy, we're funding depot cadets. So the cadets, while they're in training at depot in Regina, the officer in charge of depot has mandated her cadets that they must go in and do a reading program once a month, I think it is, with really high risk, in a really high risk area of Regina. And they go in and they read to the kids. So we sponsor that as well and provide them with materials that would be helpful for them as young cadets. And the objective there is that young cadets, we're talking young men and women, usually in their 20s, being exposed to high-risk needs youth, and creating positive relationships. This is at a grade 3 level, so that these kids have positive images of police rather than other ones they might be seeing where they live. And also for the cadets to get exposed to children living in difficult circumstances, because as soon as they graduate from depot, they get usually put into northern assignments. So it's part of their training and development that this officer in charge has decided to invest in with us at the foundation. We invest in community infrastructure, personal safety programs, such as our police officers going into schools and community organizations on their volunteer time. And they talk about the risks of human trafficking and not becoming a victim and what the signs and symptoms of that are, the alternatives to gangs, drug and alcohol awareness. And when you sit and listen to a cop talk about drug and alcohol addiction and its consequences, totally different than sitting and listening to your parents. So because they can tell the stories of what they've seen and how it's impacted them when they have to pick bodies up off the highway. It has a really powerful impact on students. We have programs around youth mental health, of course, and youth violence prevention. We have a lot of recreational programs, particularly for youth in the north, and facilitating their access to participate in the broader recreation community in Canada so that they're not disadvantaged and marginalized. I'll talk a little bit about that, what that exposure can mean later. But, and this is our Partnerships for Community in Action. I was up in Janvier last week. This is one of the cadet corps we're investing in. So we drove out to, we were in Fort McMurray we have a major initiative in Fort McMurray where we have about 8 partners involved, including the Athabasca Tribal Council, Syncrude, Hewlett-Packard, the RCMP Foundation, RCMP, a few new donors coming on soon. So we've got a multi-party partnership, and one of our initiatives is the Janvier Community Cadet Corps. So we went out to see them last week, and this is the Cadet Corps. There's one missing here, and so the drill sergeant and the coordinator, his name is Jules Nokaho, and he's an ex-RCMP officer who's returned to work in his community. And so he was drilling out to them, and so he's made them stand at attention, and he makes them call out their troop numbers, and when they call out their troop numbers, they have to go, if they're number 1, they go 1, and then number 2 goes 2, and number 9 is missing because he's very authoritative with them. Number 9 was about 5 years old, and when he said, "I'm sorry, troop, I didn't hear your number," and he went, 9! And he started to cry and took off. So maybe 5 is a little bit too young for Cadet Corps, but he came back in. But the heartwarming part about this was at the end of the session, towards the end of the session, the principal of the school, because this is held in the school, came in and had 3 more youngsters with her, and she said, "Is it too late to join the Cadet Corps?" So our Cadet Corps are very successful across the country, particularly with Aboriginal youth, and we like to see them grow like that. So that was our experience over the last 21 years and how we're continuing to grow it. But I think for the purposes of being here today, I sat last night and tried to think about where I could take this with this group. And I guess our message is that the stats haven't changed in over 20 years. So we've got 20 years ahead of us. Why don't we start focusing on these youth and changing their futures? And because if we improve the youth, we'll improve the future. And I'm going to probably be in an old folks home in about 15 years, 20 years, so I'd really like these youth to be improved. And I think what we're here to talk about today is really about social mobility, so that Aboriginal people have some social upward mobility from the statistics that we just showed here. And I think a lot of those statistics would also reflect, I didn't have any poverty statistics in there, but I think we've all seen and experienced that poverty breeds poverty unless we get involved and we invest in changing that. And I'll share a little bit of a personal example with you, a personal story. And I've never told this actually in public, so bear with me. In 1968, my mom got pregnant with me, and she said, "It's got to stop here." She was 17 when she got pregnant with my oldest brother. They were living in Hamilton, and she was in a very abusive marriage. She had another child a year later, and then 7 years later, she was pregnant with me, and she said, "It's got to stop here." So she was 17 when she got married. 9 years later, she's pregnant with another one, which is why my name is Hope. And she said, "Okay, I got to get out of this." They were living in Hamilton. She packed us up. She had 2 suitcases, 2 boys and 1 in her belly. Said, "I'm going home," which is I'm from Northern Ontario, to Kirkland Lake, phoned my family. They came and got her in the middle of the night. She got home, and my grandfather said to her, "Well, you better go on welfare, take care of those kids." That was his response. And my mom said, "I got to get an education. I got to raise 3 kids on my own." This was 1968. So she had me, and 9 months later started nursing school. She always wanted to be an RN, but she knew she didn't have the time to go to school for 3 or 4 years. So she went to 1-year nursing school. And then I was born, and she got a job, and everything was good. She met my adopted dad 3 years later. He was 19 when he came into our family. 19, he had just graduated high school. I'm sure my mother's family would have went, my God, what are you doing? But 35 years later, they were still married. But, and him being 19 and taking on a family of 3 kids, he didn't have an education, so we moved from place to place. And I always used to tease, and people would say to me, "Why do you move so much? Why does your family move so much?" We moved a lot. I was in 8 schools until grade 12. And it was because, I used to tease and say it's because we're Métis, we're nomadic. But it was because my dad couldn't figure out what he wanted to be, and he didn't get an education until he was in his early 30s. But once he got an education, life settled down. And opportunities came to us. And I'd always wanted to be a swimmer, but my parents couldn't afford to put me in swimming. And you wouldn't think that swimming is expensive, but when you're pawning some of your belongings to buy groceries, swimming's a luxury. So when my dad got his trades, he did go back to school in his 30s. He got 5 journeyman tickets, started working in the oil sands. I all of a sudden got to go to swimming classes. And then I got to join competitive swim teams. And in 2 years, I was on the national swim team. And so I remember in grade 12, a lot of my friends were older than me, and they'd quit school and said, "Oh, we're going to go part-time to finish our degrees, and we're going to work part-time and finish part-time." That sounded pretty good to me. And I remember my dad saying to me, he always had this line, "No ands, if, buts, or maybes, young lady. You are going to university next year." And I got a degree because he forced me to go to school. And I loved school, but I didn't know that was the path that I could choose. There was all kinds of paths. But he forced education, and I'm really glad that he did, because that fall when I started university in 1987, my mom said, "My turn too," because I was the last one. And my mom and I went to university together. And on Wednesdays, we would have lunch at the University of Alberta in the rocking chair room, if any of you know that. And so then after that, I got a really great job with Nova, which then became TransCanada Pipelines. I was there for 15 years. And then I got an MBA. And then I got an even better job. And I've had most amazing opportunities in my career, and I put it back to education. And now I'm working on my PhD, and I have a really excellent job again. So the point is, we've got to get educated. We've got to educate our youth. We've got to focus on that to give them opportunities. Without that, they're not going to be able to compete, and the statistics won't change. So let's invest in educating our youth. Thank you.
I forgot to mention that this time next year, we will be introducing Dr. Hope DeVoe Henderson. I have known Hope for over 20 years, and I have watched this. I call her a young woman because she's young enough to be my daughter. I have watched this young woman's career for the last 20 years, and she truly is a role model around possibilities for our people. I love the fact that Hope was talking about being a Métis person. I am also a Métis person from the Red River Valley settlements in Manitoba, and often when I speak, non-Indigenous people will say, but I don't really understand, you know, so how did the Métis people come about? I mean, we know the Indigenous people were here for tens of thousands of years, and the Métis, we typically give this answer, well, the first Métis person showed up in Canada about 9 months after the Europeans did. It is my great pleasure to introduce you to Mr. Aditya Jha. He is a rare combination of a philanthropist, a social activist, and a social entrepreneur. He has received many awards, including the 2014 Indo-Canada Chamber of Commerce Lifetime Achievement Award. He is the appointee of the Government of Canada to the First Nations Management Board. Aditya sponsored and ran for 5 years a unique initiative working with the Office of the Grand Chief of the Anishinaabe Aski Nation to nurture entrepreneurship within the Aboriginal communities of Canada. His charitable foundation is POA, and it created endowments at 4 universities, Ryerson, Trent, York, and George Brown College. And that foundation grants a total of 13 bursary awards, $42,000 annually to students in perpetuity. It is my great pleasure to introduce you to Mr. Aditya Jha, founder of the POA.
Thank you so much for such a kind introduction. Since everybody have been telling what is their background, I want to assure you I'm an Indian. Good morning and welcome to you all for coming together to this conversation session of the Creative Leaders Symposium. Our presence here is the testimony of our awareness of engaging ourselves for a very timely and topical conversation on economic prosperity of the Aboriginal community of Canada. We need to have a long pause before we approach this topic. Should we talk about economic prosperity of Aboriginal community in Canada or sustained economic prosperity of Canada through economic participation of Aboriginal people? And ladies and gentlemen, that is the big question. And that is, to my mind, most relevant question. I wish to provoke this conversation on 5 themes. The number 1, as I said before, sustained economic prosperity of Canada, engaging Aboriginal peoples. Second topic is minority-majority Canada, what it entails for Aboriginal peoples. Third, nurture entrepreneurship or government-centric economic prosperity. Fourth, trust societies and sustained economic prosperity. And the last, what I call is a third force. So let me elaborate on all of these. First of all, for Canada to stay on the curve of high quality of life and growth, we must focus on demographic dividend. I was amazed when I saw some of the data you shared. I'd like to have a copy of that presentation. I think that is, to me, alarming and frightening. I've been in Canada not long enough, like most of you have. So the changing demographics of Canada could be either a recipe of success or disaster, depending upon if we leverage it for growth, then it will minimize our divides and avoid the problems associated with community-based sectarian demands and benefits. But if we are unsuccessful, then our demographics will become a ticking time bomb. I just want to highlight briefly that our workforce is aging, and the birth reduction is compounding the problem of social well-being. About 60% of Canadian workforce don't have pension plan, and 40% of current workforce will reach a retirement age over the next 2 decades. This crisis will not only be financial, but it will have serious social repercussions. Our policymakers do not want to talk about it, and hence the civil society and we the leaders need to seriously deliberate this. Some of the numbers, what I found very interesting was that between 2001 to 2026, in 25 years period, more than 600,000 Aboriginal youth will enter the labor market, with Aboriginal communities' annual population growth of 350%. I saw a stat that Canada is going to become 7th oldest country in the world from 13th, which was a few years ago. So here you have reduction, the aging population, alarmingly aging population, and then you have 350% more birth rate in a community. And over the same period, the northern and remote regions of Canada, where 50% of these people live, Aboriginal people live, will see over $150 billion natural resources projects. So you have people living there, they are much younger, rest of Canada is aging, economic activity is happening. The big question to ask is whether we will see the demographic dividend through this opportunity. Is our country and the Aboriginal leaders, we tend to blame the government and others. I grew up in a village in Nepal, 16 years, no different in terms of facilities that what you see in many of the communities in Canada. Only difference was there was a tremendous emphasis on education. My mother was illiterate. My father didn't finish his university. But I don't remember a day when my mother is just she was a little bit brutal, did you do this, did you do that? I used to tell her, what kind of mother you are? Instead of giving me a hug and telling me, come here, she always asks, will you be a doctor or not? I don't know. So the big question is to ask whether we will see the demographic dividend from this and especially I want to highlight the Aboriginal leaders aligning their priorities and actions to benefit from this large young Aboriginal population in resource-rich remote areas, or will it be giving birth to many Caledonia-like situations and become source of major social tensions? I want to tell you, I've lived in many countries, worked, France, Australia, Singapore, grew up in India. I do not find any, and I travel a lot, I have business in other places. I haven't found any country which had this degree of social calm. But people are not realizing that social calm is going to be disturbed. All the undercurrents are, if you don't manage it properly, it is going to become truly a disaster for this country. So, ladies and gentlemen, the high growth rate of working age Aboriginal population could be a blessing or curse. As our country ages, there will be premium on younger Canadians whose efforts and full participation in economy will need to support the aging Canadians and support tax revenue, otherwise they will be seen as an economic cost. So they had a choice. I was talking to the federal minister some years, a few years ago, about, I say, even if you don't love them, love that $10 billion. And that will only happen, I say, you cannot say I will not give it, you will have to give it. Or they are economically participating and then you save your $10 billion. I said, just for the love of money, do that, John. So when I highlight all these things, I'm not advocating here from social and cultural aspect or just trying to be just to the Aboriginal communities. I'm trying to provoke you to make a strong case for the demographic dividend for Canada and for all Canadians in Canada's economic interest. That is the underlying thing. that in Canada's economic interest, I think that the debate has to shift, not to help Aboriginals, to help Canada. I think we should just hammer that point. All Canadians in Canada have a stake in Aboriginal community economic development. So that was my lengthy first point. The second theme is minority, majority Canada. And that topic is totally off the radar of discussion from the policy planners and more depressing from the view of the Aboriginal leaders. Canada is inching towards, this is not a figment of imagination of mine, Canada is inching towards becoming a country that will have the majority of minority people, new Canadians. You will see these funny accents, lot more, okay? And although new Canadians are not responsible for the past abuses perpetrated in the name of the Crown towards the Aboriginal people, we are now responsible for how we choose to change these ugly realities. And it's not going to happen at the initiative of the new Canadians. The Aboriginals need to engage. The leaders need to engage. It should not be a token representation. That there should be more. Half of the speakers, I think, at these kind of forums should be the new Canadians. Because if we are going to the majority people, this is our issue, these are our people, and how we integrate, amalgamate ourselves into the whole thing. This problem of neglect may be compounded. I think, in fact, maybe is a soft word. Since the new Canadians have hardly any knowledge, you come to my gatherings, ask anybody about these Aboriginal people. They don't have any knowledge. They just think they have all kinds of images about them. Hardly any knowledge, sensitivity, and any sense of guilt for the plight of the Aboriginal people. So what will you expect from such people? They have no knowledge, they are not sensitive towards you, and they don't have any guilt. They have done nothing wrong. And on top of that, their experience and belief that we looked after ourselves. And so should everybody else. In fact, many new Canadians think, why the hell they are asking government about all these things? Why can't they just figure out the way we did figure out ourselves? So this would be a myopic view, and imagine the impact of this when Canada is inching towards becoming a majority country consisting of minority people. I tell Grand Chief and some of the other people, I said, first of all, you should also know about others, because these are large number of people. I don't think there is a greater understanding of the new Canadians among the Aboriginal people and the leaders. So this is something I'm just provoking you to debate, discuss, and if you really think this should be dismissed, I don't think so, but we should talk about that second topic. That brings me to the third theme of nurturing entrepreneurship or government-sponsored, supported economic prosperity of Aboriginal peoples. I have been reading about Aboriginal since I got my Order of Canada. I thought I should know about Canada. And I've been reading, and I find that how helpful and how entrepreneurial Aboriginal people were there when the Europeans came. So they were traders. You guys were traders. You were helpful for the other people to come and survive and exist and prosper. What has happened to that? How come so many new Canadians with little language proficiency and with no resources are able to succeed and build businesses and wealth? That is a question to ask. Is that everything has to be towards government and other thing? Is there some other way? And these are your neighbors, the people who live by you, by next to you. And ask them, how did you do it? I can't understand your English. And the guy has a mansion, has business, that people were working for him. So that is the other third question I would like you to seriously think about it. And I am a little bit, I think not rationally, but otherwise, more and more I have gotten engaged in the last 14 years with Aboriginal people. And I'm saying, why the hell the whole focus is only on job creation? Of course, job creation is important. Even one of the national chief a few years ago, I said, can you not focus 10% on finding your best, nurture them so that they are, if not as good as, better than the mainstream people in terms of wealth creation. Because wealth is a statement. It's not about whether I can drive a Ferrari. Wealth, when the community create wealth, it is a making statement, hey, I'm as good as you. It's also about the ability to do. As much you think, but even few rich people are able to make some major impact. I have found even people who move away from their world, and when they are successful, they have made things, they think about their people, their culture, their remote places. So it's not about that they are totally cut off. The key is about how well we have allowed them to nurture excellence, how much they have succeeded. I wish to bring your attention to the fourth topic, and that is trust societies and sustained economic development. Look around the world and the history of the world. No country or a society or a family has had the sustained prosperous life with what was endowed by nature or by history. Even today, look at Saudi Arabia has lots of wealth. Look at the Saudi people. You just watch them and see how, what I call the trust society, the society which just inherits their behavior and what they do with that. Just watch that. The so-called blessed ones have over the period degenerated if they have not had the culture and focus of entrepreneurship and innovation, and they didn't leverage what they inherited. I think very little discussion happens on leveraging the inheritance, which maybe it has not been given all of that which you have inherited. But think about what will you do if you get it? How prepared you are to multiply it. I also worry that not recognizing that individual interest and motivation is extremely important for entrepreneurial success. And the Aboriginal community should seriously introspect their focus on band and community-based economic engagement. Maybe for a few things it is helpful, but I think there has to be this deep thought that how through the muscle and access of the community, individuals of the community should become massively successful. Instead of saying, no, why should you only benefit? This brings me to the last theme of our conversation, what I call the third force, and its possible role in economic participation of the Aboriginal community for sustained economic development of Canada. And that is the theme. Again, I'm saying all that for Canada. It is the social philanthropic leadership of Canada, the third leg of the collaborative partnership. The social philanthropic leadership. I think there has to be a blending of government, Aboriginal leaders, and people in different communities, the corporations, but active engagement of that, working with Aboriginal leaders and with the government of Canada. This third force has the resources, unharnessed passion. I want to qualify this word. I have found that 5 years I used to bring about 20 Aboriginal youth from Northern Ontario, and I will pair them up with the executive VPs or CEOs, just to job shadow them. And what I found was that whenever I approached almost anybody in Toronto, large companies, I didn't see some kind of political correct statement. They were eager to help if they were available. But they always told me, if you do it, I'll do it, but don't expect me to take the lead. So that's why I'm using the word unharnessed passion. And they have the skills for radical transformation of economic engagement of the Aboriginal peoples, for the benefit of Canada, and that will greatly aid the sustenance of social calm in Canada. Somebody asked me from India, because I always keep talking about how great this country is, the best on the planet. He said, what is so special? Don't give me a lecture, just tell me briefly. And I said, the social calm. I don't see here gun. State is absent from day-to-day life. When it's needed, you do see people with masks and guns and everything in tank. But I said, this country, despite all its diversity, I see that readiness to accept for who you are, and there's a calmness in this country. And to somebody like me, who considers very fortunate, that matters a lot, and that's why I feel that people like us should be more and more engaged on the issue like this. So in the closing, I want to restate that we need to fundamentally reorient our thinking for the continued and sustained well-being of Canada. We are at the tipping point to make our First Peoples participate fully in our economic agenda and to build a just and equitable society. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Hope and Aditya, for such compelling presentations looking at the spectrum, looking at the role of law enforcement, looking at the role of social enterprise and the communities themselves. And thank you, Aditya, for your perspective from your own country and your observations here. We would now like to open up the floor. Our panelists have all agreed to engage in discussions with you. We have 2 microphones, one near the front of the room and one at the back, and we would like to open them up. So when you are ready to ask a question, please just make your way and line up at the microphones. And if you could start by just simply saying your name and if you are with an organization, what organization, and then if you could be as succinct as possible with your questions. You know, as Indigenous people, we love to talk and tell stories. I'd ask you to limit the stories and just get to the question. Thank you. Go ahead. Microphone number 1.
First of all, I'd like to say thank you both to Hope and Aditya. It's good to see you, Aditya, again. It's great to be in a room with a real Indian. And Hope, thank you for sharing your story as well. I think one of the things that it invokes in me is the desire that we as Indigenous people need to work collaboratively and work as partners. I'm interested in getting your statistics, if you don't mind. I hope I would. And I'm curious to know if it was broader statistics, because I know when we opened up, Betty Ann talked about off-reserve and on-reserve. So I'm more curious to find out if those statistics are blended or if they're specific.
So I pulled them from various StatsCan reports from either the 2006 census or other documents. I have all of the sources. I can provide you with that. So I can leave the PowerPoint with Cap, or you can get my card and I can send it to you. But I do have the sources for all of my stats.
That'd be great. And I'd be remiss too. I'm a governing director for the Circle for Philanthropy and Aboriginal Peoples of Canada, and I would encourage you both to become members of the foundation. The Circle has been around for a number of years now. And a beautiful young lady right in front of me here that would be more than happy to talk about the foundation when the opportunity comes. So thank you again for your candor, for provoking our thinking as well. I think that was really important. Big witch.
Thank you very much.
Good morning. My name is Susanna Clough-Clyburn. I'm with the Canadian Chamber of Commerce, so I'm from the other side. I'm not Aboriginal, and I don't speak for Aboriginal business specifically, but who I do speak for are Canadian businesses, and I've been with the Chamber now for close to 6.5 years. And my experience, starting very early at my time with the Chamber, is that Canadian business is getting it. With regard to what you've both spoken to this morning, the fact that engaging this young, fast-growing segment of our population is an opportunity for all Canadians. It's not an Aboriginal issue, it's a Canadian issue. And I just wanted to provide you with some food for thought and a suggestion actually for you and for everybody in the room. That, and I'm just, we've done some, or I've done some major work over the last 4 years as our members have made it increasingly clear that they want to identify opportunities to work more closely with Aboriginal business people and in employing Aboriginal peoples in their businesses. The most recent paper that we did is called Opportunity Found, which I think is a very telling title, Improving the Participation of Aboriginal Peoples in Our Workforce. I'm sorry, I'm moving away from the microphone. But what it does is it takes a bit of a different approach. I decided that rather than pointing out the problems, which many people are much more expert in than I, to probe, we decided to highlight some of the success stories where major Canadian companies have worked very successfully with Aboriginal peoples in terms of engaging them in their workplaces. Now, it's not philanthropy, it's because it makes good economic sense for their businesses to do this. The one exception to that is a post-secondary education institution called the University of Ontario Institute of Technology, which operates just north of Oshawa and has a very high representation of Aboriginal peoples in its student population. And they've recognized that this is a very important group of people for them to start nurturing in elementary school, and they've started programs in Oshawa to bring Aboriginal peoples in the Oshawa-Durham region into weekly sessions where they bring business people in, they bring role models in from the Aboriginal community and from the university to engage with young people. They have meals together, they do activities together, and they're starting out really early to try and impart the importance of education and the opportunities that it will bring to them if they pursue that route. The other area I wanted to just briefly touch on before I sit down and hand it over to someone else is the issue of entrepreneurship. And those are two areas that the Canadian Chamber has been very much engaged in and of personal importance to me because I've been engaged in them as well. And one of the things that came up in some work we did in 2014 with entrepreneurs across the country, is the fact that entrepreneurship is not part of the curriculum in any level of either of education, be it elementary, secondary, or post-secondary. And so one of the things that I would like to encourage you to do, in addition to going to our website, looking up this paper, and looking at some of the examples of where businesses and Aboriginal communities have worked together, it may give people some great ideas of how you can reach out to businesses. The business community is ready, willing, and very able to work with you on opportunities, but to also impart the need for bringing the business community into schools as early as elementary school. And your local chambers of commerce would be more than willing to work with you on that, because there's nothing more exciting than having somebody come in who has their own business, is excited, is engaged, and there's a big stake in their career success for them that's more than collecting a paycheck. So just a couple of pieces of food for thought.
Thank you. Hope or Aditya, do you have any further comments to add to that? Any other questions? Please, go ahead.
I don't have a question. I'm entering into a dialogue with you. And I'm really impressed that you touched on one element, and that was trade. And we are experts in trade. We still are. As a matter of fact, when I designed the economic modeling in Kitimat 10 years ago, when I would sit in front of our people, I would talk about economic development, and everybody would go looking off into the blue yonder. When I talked about trade, people went, aha, there you go. So you touch on a very important element. It is trade. And the modeling that I created in Kitimat was based on trading for certainty. So we have Aboriginal title and Aboriginal rights to our lands and resources that provided our people with food, shelter, clothing, sustenance, and wealth. And we sat down with many companies, and in my tenure, I negotiated 18 impact benefit agreements with very large companies. When I started, my community was $6.5 million in debt. When I lost the election in June of 2009, we had $6.5 million surplus, $3.8 million in our investment account. People laughed at us at the beginning. You asked a question about how did it get this way. That is a very difficult question, and I'm going to shed some light on it. The issues that we face have been legislated into existence. Canada is one of the few countries in the world where legislation defines who you are, being an Indian, a non-status Indian, a Métis, an Inuit. There is no other legislation that defines who is Chinese, Japanese, German. Very important. And so that legislation led to 7 social inequities: displacement from our lands and resources, trauma being the Indian Act itself, residential schools, discrimination, racism. That led to academic stranding, which is they use a Myers-Briggs type indicator test to label our children as special needs with severe learning disabilities and the need for English as a second language. The government of Canada spends $350 million a year on special needs programming. It is the only area in the federal government where there is no policy that says that there has to be value for dollar spent. It's the only exception. Every other dollar that is spent by the Canadian government under the Treasury Board guidelines, there has to be value created. That's the exception. Very important. When you have no education and when you graduate with a leaving school certificate, you get a piece of paper that's not worth anything, and that leads to chronic unemployment. Chronic unemployment leads to poverty. Poverty leads to addictions, and then you're left with skill and knowledge deficiencies. And unfortunately, the legislation continues to this day unabated. In fact, I think that the social safety net, the peace and tranquility that you talk about is going to be greatly eroded under Bill C-51. We can't even be getting up, speaking out against the things that are going on without being labeled a terrorist.
So let me answer.
I'm not finished yet. I patiently listened to you. And if things are going to change, not only do we need to be educated, but the outside, our communities need to be educated on the realities that are in existence. That change has to be translated into things that the people that are not First Nations can actually understand. It's a two-way street. And finally, you cannot dichotomize one from the other. The social inequities that we face, unless we very consciously create change and structure, nothing is going to change. And the demographics that you talk about are not going to change. I'm an entrepreneur. I was a former politician. I was a chief of my community for 8 years. After I lost the election, I went 14 months without an income. The people that I brought in that were supposed to be helping us, they all basically threw me under the bus because they had a new chief in town, and they didn't want anything to do with me because I represented the past. I had to reinvent myself 3 times. I created a company called Kowloon Ventures that's a family business that is designed to define the economic component of our Aboriginal title and rights. That's how you create change.
Thank you very much. Aditya.
Yeah. Thank you so much for bringing out so many issues. I think first point you talked about was trader, and I had also mentioned. And I think we need to just, you need to just bring it out to the mainstream of the Aboriginal community and bring the modern context to that, because now you have an opportunity to trade internationally, nationally. So what new strategies, what is the new way of doing it? Trade requires financing, because the whole model in Aboriginal communities is most of the time the government financing. And that's not the answer, because as a trader, you will be independent. So that's the one point I just want to acknowledge what you just highlighted. The other part, as you said, about all the problems, are truly that's there. So one way is that talk about all the definitions by the federal government and the mainstream Canadian society and the problems we have. And keep talking about it and always say, oh, we cannot go outside because this has been defined like that. The other way is at least some people have to break off and say to hell with this federal government and everything. We are going to find, or I am the outlier, and we are going to do despite all the things that's there, because that's how many people here have come, and they do not have expectation from the government. Not that it is a bad thing to have. If there is some favorable conditions, that's fine. So I'm not saying that those problems should be undermined, but somehow we got to figure out a way to break it from there. And that is the critical issue, that are we ready to break from there? How we will? Can we encourage our best of the best? I work with many new Canadians as well, and many of them are very disappointed. Their anger, to some extent, is rightly justified because of the other people who are not helping. But my question to them is, so now that you know, you're not going to change that person, what are you going to do differently? And that is one question we should at least ask. And maybe some of us will find some solution. Because that guy who's not supporting you because you're no longer a chief, it's very undesirable but natural phenomenon. That's how it happens. People behave like that. So that's my answer.
Thank you. Other comments?
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, speakers. My name is Ross Holden. I'm with the Nuclear Waste Management Organization. Let me just say, first of all, I appreciate very much the discussions this morning and the themes of both of your talks. I know both of you touched on education quite a bit, and obviously education is very important to the issues we're grappling with today and constantly on a day-to-day basis, and I also appreciate the remarks of the previous speaker, very well taken. I have to say on a personal note, I've always loved learning. I think, especially as a, well, even today I love learning. Love learning as a young person as well, and I think children are hardwired to learn. They're sponges. They're meant to soak everything up and learn as much as possible. But I'm afraid our education system today is not structured and not designed to be conducive as much as it could be to educating people in a holistic manner. And this goes for all of society. But I think it's a difficult challenge in particular for Aboriginal peoples. Today's education system, let's be honest, it is a product of industrialization and the entrenchment of capitalism in European society. And it has been used as a tool of colonialism, not just on Turtle Island, but around the world. Young people, in particular young men, are not comfortable sitting in a classroom, showing up at 9 a.m., departing at 3:30 or 4, sitting in a chair. They'd rather be out on the land. They'd rather be hunting or playing sports, as is today's substitute for many activities that were traditionally followed. So given the choice, and I don't think it's just Aboriginal young men and women, but I think given a choice, I think many people in today's society would rather not conform to that very strict, very regimented, very narrowly defined often in terms of what it is you are here to learn. So it's not surprising. I don't think it should be that surprising that a lot of young people choose not to go to school and choose not to conform to that. So as tall an order as it may be, I believe the challenge ultimately, if we're going to educate, quote unquote, our young people to prepare them for society, that we need to get away from thinking in terms of rigid educational roles and approaches that are training people to work in factories or to be the next CEO. As laudable as those goals are, I think we need to take a more flexible, a more holistic approach to education, recognizing that teenagers aren't meant to get up at 6 a.m. and get to school by 8. That we need to be more flexible in terms of what is being taught and when, and provide an environment for our young people that gives them options and gives them an opportunity to, at the same time, express themselves as they are meant to be and as they traditionally did hundreds of years ago. And I think that goes for all segments of society today. And until we address those challenges and come up with a system, an approach that is more conducive to that, more holistic, we're going to continue to be faced with these problems. So I'm looking for that constantly, and I encourage that. And hopefully I can encourage my own children to follow that path as well. Ultimately, I think that's the way to go, and that would be successful. Thank you.
Thank you.
I think very important thought, what you just enunciated. I think there is always constant need of making things we do in our society relevant to today's time. And that debate is not new. It has been, if you go back 20 years, 50 years, 100 years, you will find similar discussion happening. So I think it's not only that we change the education, we will also change what happens after you're educated. You will look for a job. Is the recruiters thinking differently or not? Because we are going back to the same thing that have you finished your undergrad, do you have this degree, these papers you have done. So there will be a mismatch. Another point I just want to highlight, as much we talk about that how youth has changed, but we live in a global economy. A teenager in South Korea, in China, in India is not complaining about so many things what a young man in Canada complains about. And you are going to, because the economy, you are going to compete with them also. So think about that everybody is doing same thing so that the field is leveled for everybody. One last thing I just want to say that I met a young guy, I was in India, and I said, what are you doing? He said, I'm struggling, I didn't get my admission. And I said, what happened? He says, I was going to go to the engineering college, but I could not get admission in any of the colleges in New Delhi I wanted. And I said, what does your parents feel? He said, they can't say anything to me. He says, I have 95% grades, but I couldn't qualify because the competition is so intense. So there are some realities, global realities, we have to put that in perspective.
Thank you. Hope?
Just I'm trying to synthesize the last 3 or 4 speakers and to see if there was some themes in the comments. And what I picked up from that is, one, I would very much agree that the education system is not responding adequately and quickly enough to the changing world that our children are growing up in today. You're right, there's no entrepreneurship, small business type of courses in elementary, junior high, high school that I know of. You don't get into that until you take a commerce degree. And if you take a commerce degree, or you're forced to take a commerce course as part of another degree. That's one thing I do love about liberal arts universities. They do force you to get a broader critical thinking, liberal thinking mind, and I don't mean politically liberal, but so I think that the universities are adapting a little bit more to that. I spent the last couple of years at Mount Royal University, and I saw some very innovative teaching and programming and holistic approaches there. But I think the younger education system, junior high and high school particularly, needs to reflect that that self-sufficiency and independence that Steve was talking about and that Aditya were talking about. We're in a global economy now. Our Aboriginal youth need to be thinking about self-sufficiency and independence, and not about who am I going to work for, but what am I going to do, and take the ownership on I can be an entrepreneur, I can be an employer, and creating that mind shift. I don't have to work for somebody. I can work for myself, and I can employ other people and be the leader in that. Marie and Sandra and I sit on the Premier's Advisory Council for the Economic Security of Aboriginal Women in Alberta, and we've been grappling with this and making recommendations to the Premier on what should the focus be on youth, entrepreneurship. We're a global economy. How do we participate as individuals in our nations and as individuals in the global economy? And I think there has to be a higher emphasis on that than there is, I get a job when I graduate and go work for somebody else. And then I know my dad used to say to me, you're not going to rely on anybody, young lady. You're going to be independent, and you are going to make your way in this world all on your own, and don't lean and rely on anybody else. It's the fishing rod and the fish kind of thing. And our people should be inventing the new fishing rods and selling them abroad in the global market.
Thank you.
Good morning. It's a pleasure to be here. My name is Bill Van Aderson. I'm here as a representative of CESO, Canadian Executive Service Organization. I've done work with CESO as a volunteer for close to 20 years. 20 years ago, I retired from over 20 years working with the Department of Indian Affairs. So I know a little bit about that side of the world. These issues we're talking about today are very important, and some aspects of them are very complicated. I want to raise one specific issue that is very simple. And I'm addressing my comments to the people in the room here who are not Aboriginal people particularly, and who have some influence. And what I want to inform people is something that is not generally known, but the Aboriginal people in this room all know this, and that is that at the present time, the federal funding for schools, elementary, secondary schools, on reserves, is about between 60 and 70% per student of what it costs on equivalent provincial schools. At the same time, the federal government funds, there are a lot of kids who live on reserves who go to school off reserve. In those cases, the federal government funds the province for what it costs to educate them in the provincial schools, and they pay them 100% of what it costs in the provincial system. This is absolute discrimination. There is absolutely no justification for it. It's just because the federal government is being cheap, and they can get away with it. And they get away with it because the Canadian public doesn't know about it or doesn't care and isn't speaking up and criticizing them over it. If this was non-Aboriginal kids in the city that were being treated this way, it wouldn't last for 12 months. This has lasted for many years. So I'm calling on people in this room to be aware of this and to use their channels to speak up and get some action. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Hello, my name is Leland McLeod. I'm a Carleton University student. I also work for Motivate Canada, a nonprofit organization, in a program called Gen 7. And I also work with youth. I'm a youth advocate. I just wanted to speak about education because it's something that is really important for me, and also entrepreneurship because it's something I've become involved in lately. One thing that actually I just wanted to bring up first is just the concern about, we want young people to be educated about entrepreneurship and the opportunities it provides, but I also believe there's also a danger in bringing private sector interest into schools too, because I've just seen privatization of education in some situations can be problematic. But I've also seen a lot of successful ways to talk about entrepreneurship with youth. Like in Gen 7, what we do is we go into a community, usually a reserve community, or sometimes we do it in a city, and we talk about youth and make them understand that if they have a good idea about the health, promoting the health and active living of their fellow youth, then no one's going to stop them from doing that. So we get them to seek out grassroots funding and sponsorships from local businesses, and they usually get assistance to run a small thing like a tournament or a race, which basically gives them an idea about putting together the infrastructure towards running a project at a young age of about 12, or 15. And so I find that if you get youth believing that their ideas are the valuable thing, because entrepreneurship is one thing, but the ideas behind a business is what's really valuable. I believe ideas are really what it's important, and to make young people believe in their ideas. Emphasize business, but make them believe that it's really the ideas, And with education, I believe it is really changing. Like with Carleton, we go into a high school once a week and an elementary school once a week to talk about Aboriginal issues. mainly because there's been a mandate established by the government to teach about Aboriginal issues that hasn't yet been fully accommodated, because a lot of teachers don't know how to teach it, don't feel comfortable teaching it. And also, I'd understand that, because my dad worked for immigration and citizenship, and I do understand that all the new Canadians coming in aren't, they aren't asked or educated about the history of Canada, which I think would be a good thing too, because I think it would help create a dialogue between new Canadians, which in so many cases have similar colonial situations in their own countries that they face. So I think we actually have a lot to align here. Even in Scotland, my last name is MacLeod, and the Scottish people were treated the same way by colonial powers as the Indigenous people were. So we all have something to share in this, and it is a Canadian issue, but it's a human issue too, because you'll see this pattern everywhere in the world. So I'd just like to would end on one positive note, is that as much as we'd like to educate young people that they can make this difference, I'm noticing that even before you start to educate young people, if you give them a little bit of belief in their ideas, they'll step up with the solution before you ask them to. They already know something's wrong and we need to change, and they're starting to do it already. So I think that it takes so long to come up with programs. It takes so long to design new educational platforms and curriculums. But I think the young people will already be set by the time we have that done. What do you guys think about that? Gotcha.
The voice of youth hasn't been heard enough in this country. I absolutely agree, and congratulations on getting your education and continuing to volunteer in the community. I think that's a beautiful combination of getting experience. Having worked in the private sector for 20-some years, and then in the post-secondary sector, I've experienced firsthand the benefits of industry and private sector working together in collaboration with post-secondary institutions, particularly on research. And I would be worried if we didn't have collaborations between industry and academia. I'd be very worried about that. I think that the work that's done by academics is theoretical, and the work that's done in private practice is practical, and it's a beautiful marriage when the two come together. And I would be very worried about separating that and seeing when we graduate engineers and technologists and social scientists and we put them into the workplace, it advances and complements their education. It's a continuation of their education. I like to see those people go back in and work collaboratively with post-secondary institutions. And just at the small university that I worked at, I saw some amazing results coming out of the practical. It was a very practical research area, so I'm contradicting myself a bit, but some universities do have academic programs that focus on practical research, so I don't want to minimize that. But I would be very worried about separating the two, and I'm not worried about the impact of private industry getting involved in partnership with post-secondaries, because I also, when I worked in that post-secondary institution, I also felt and saw the power of the protection of academic freedom and the systems and procedures that are put in place to protect that academic freedom from being compromised by private interests. So I advocate very much for public-private, public institution, private business partnerships.
Thank you. Go ahead.
One of the roles which I do as a volunteer is one of the institutions, Centennial College. I'm an entrepreneur in residence at a School of Business, spend about 2-3 days a month. And that has given me a totally different perspective. To take from where she left is that not every private company, because we have the generalized perception, not every private company has a Big Mac to sell. So that how you can sell more burgers and don't care about children, or Coca-Cola or something like that. There are companies which have nothing to do to the children, but I think bringing industry or private organizations not only will benefit the students, it benefits the teachers, the institution. Even that private organization, when we come together, it sensitizes everybody. So that's the one thing. The other thing I wanted to highlight, when we talk about entrepreneurship, people always think about, oh, how can you start your own business? I think that increasingly will become lesser part of the entrepreneurship. It's entrepreneurship being an entrepreneur, entrepreneurial. In Apple, there must be some people who are very entrepreneurial. That's why they think of iWatch or iPod and how they revived and how Nortel went down the drain. So also, even if you are in a startup company, an entrepreneurial setup, like I have my company, I'm looking for people who are more entrepreneurial than even I am. And that only can propel my idea and business. So there are many layers at which the entrepreneurial behavior and entrepreneurship is going to help in a big structure, in a startup structure, in a small structure.
Thank you. We're about a minute into the break, and I want to be very respectful about keeping on time. Kelly, can you make your comments in 1 or 2 minutes?
Or we can go right to the break.
We can go right to the break.
Absolutely. Let's do that, and I'll find a way to work it in later.
Thank you. I would ask that you continue this discussion. Thank you, Hope and Aditya. Isn't it it's so easy as a moderator when people are just so darn cooperative with you, right? Hope and Aditya, thank you so much for stimulating what the intent is of this conference, of this symposium, creative, thought-provoking discussions, which means a variety of perspectives. Thank you so much. If I could, just before I let you go on the break, if I could ask our next presenters, Nancy Villeneuve, Virginie Bronsard, and Mary Jane Lustel, to come see me for a moment on the break. I'll wait here for you. We will reconvene at 10:45 promptly. So thank you so much. Well,